Welcome to ReSounding, a podcast exploring the power of the arts in advocacy and in action. We talk with artists and activists, taking a deep dive into questions surrounding the causes of displacement, the strength and the vulnerability of people on the move, and the potential of the arts to shine a light on social injustice and impact people's lives for the better. My name is Laura Hassler, and in this episode I spoke to Dwayne Booth, better known as the artist and political cartoonist Mr. Fish. Mr. Fish has made his name by speaking truth to power through his incendiary art and thought-provoking humor. Together we talk about the spirit of protest through generations and the role of the artist in revealing the truth of our world. Mr. Fish's latest book, Nobody Left, features interviews with iconic artists and rebels from the past decades of North American history, exploring the revolutionary soul of the 60s and 70s, and where our political anger lies today. Mr. Fish, welcome to our podcast, ReSounding. Very glad that you could join us today.
I'm thrilled.
I think, we're from the same region originally, East Coast U.S. I'm from outside of New York City, grew up there, have lived in Europe for most of my life, but there are a lot of things in the way you speak that resonate with me. And how would you describe yourself as an artist? How would you describe your place in society now?
I'm happy to be talking to you because you being with Musicians Without Borders, you understand, as I understand, that when it comes to the language of art, it's a universal language. It has nothing to do with being contained inside borders or nationalities. While those things can influence how you communicate as an artist, they shouldn't define what your mission is, which for me is a humanitarian mission. It's about the common experiences that we have as human beings, far and above anything else. So as far as feeling particularly American, I can say that I feel American as somebody who wants to get out most of the time, and you've succeeded in doing that. And it's actually been a conversation my wife and I have had for years. And the conversation is, do we leave and comment on this society, this Leviathan that is threatening so many things globally from the outside as an external voice, or do we remain inside the disease to communicate what we think we should be doing at the center of the storm? Because, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have left, but one of the things, if you're trying to fix a society, one of the options is obviously to stay on the inside and try to fix it from the point of the combustion and the devouring of innocence.
From the heart of the beast, we used to say.
Right. Yeah. And just from your generation, I mean, you're a little older than me, and the book that you were talking about before we started recording, my most recent book, Nobody Left, is looking at the time period that when you were cognizant of things that were going on, and probably when you were politicized. And for me, of course, I wasn't living at that time in a way that I knew what was going on. I was a really young person. I'm jealous. I'm jealous of having the opportunity to have that fight, to see myself surrounded by people who are congregated around their own pain and being vocal about it, which is something that is missing, I think, in the political climate of the United States. Mm-hmm. So I'm so happy to be talking to you because I do want to get your perspective. As I said, the book Nobody Left is about me speaking to many of my heroes and people who were active and radicalized at that time and doing the work that they were doing, artists and philosophers and thinkers, to find out what happened, what happened to the promise of that generation that was having all the right talking points and doing and putting all the right proper pressures on power and delegitimizing the whole concept that the winners should be framing all the conversations everybody else should be having and what is winning. And also, like, what the problem now, I think, is, and now I'm going to sound like an old person, but I do think that technology has fed into this impatience that the younger generation has, as far as needing to exert enough pressure for change inside of a society. You need to have some stamina, and you need to lose a lot before you can win. I think that the current generation of upstarts are used to the immediacy of having their curiosities met in an instant, and then satisfied in the sense that they get access to what they're curious about, and then to move on to the next thing. That's how the technology functions now. There's no deep journalism. There's no long form journalism that it allows people to look deeper at issues, to deliberate on the meaning of history even. And this has probably been your experience. You can tell me from when you were younger, you understood that you needed to suffer some. You needed to endure discomfort before you could make headway into cultural change and political change.
Yes, right. And I would like to say something about that, but I also first want to just tell our audience that the book that you referred to that we were just speaking about is your book, Nobody Left, which is how I really sort of got to know you by buying that book. And we started discussing it within Art27. So just to recommend it to people who are listening, order this book, Nobody Left by Mr. Fish, which is a series of very interesting interviews with inspiring people across those generations, and a lot of people from my generation. I grew up in a peace movement family, so I was politicized by the time I was 8, I think, out on demonstrations and going to hear this young unknown Black pastor at demonstrations when there were only 2,000 or 3,000 people there. His name was Martin Luther King, and then also going as a 15-year-old to Washington to hear on that day in August in 1963. So that's the sphere I grew up in, and I think that my parents were working in an organization that helped to organize the Freedom Rides in 1947. There were people who taught us a lot about sacrifice, and who had, along with this incredible bravery, I would say, and willing to suffer for the common good. What I also remember is people who had an incredible love of life. So, and that went together. I mean, Bayard Rustin, who was Martin Luther King's main strategist, he was a family friend. And, he was out on the streets and in those demonstrations. He also spent years in prison during the Second World War as a draft refuser. But he was an amazing singer also.
Right.
And humor, he had so much humor. And I just was surrounded by these people who had understood that when you approach life with a kind of sense of humor also about yourself and a love of life and a willingness to endure what you had to endure in order to stand on the right side of history, I would say, or stand with people who were suffering. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, I didn't know any better than that this was my life. And looking back on it, I think, I was just surrounded by brilliant, inspiring people.
You're so right about that, because and what we can do with what you just said is bring in the key element that while there was sort of a radical shift in how people engage with politics, there was also this great explosion of new satire, of just the arts community was involved in the conversation, which it is much less now. So just even speaking about music, you had one thing that helps a movement along is when you feel sexy, excited, and relevant when you're participating in it. And what helps that is that there's fashion that goes with that. There's attitude, there's whole new language that can be introduced into it. So that's a lot of what my book is about, and a lot of what my intention as an artist is to, it doesn't have to be enduring, being arrested, chaining yourself to fence, around the White House and being dragged away. And those discomforts are built in, but how do you make those worthwhile? You figure out what to sing with each other, how to sing with each other. What kind of art is going to make you feel like a fully realized human being who knows how to find humor in your discomfort, a humanizing strategy with which to get through to the other side. All of those things. It's really, really important, because if you look at the 1960s, and even you were talking about the late 40s, organizing, freedom rides and so forth, what was happening in the late 40s and going into the 1950s? This is right after the Second World War.
Right.
All right. So what was demonstrated to the globe after the Second World War was that maybe following the leader is not the right tact. Maybe we shouldn't trust science to solve all of our problems. It gave us the atomic weaponry.
Exactly.
Right. So all of a sudden there needed to be a different kind of search. There needed to be something that fulfilled our demand for truth telling. So what happened was, right after the Second World War, something like bebop jazz all of a sudden appears, where you have people like Coltrane, Dizzy Gillespie, and those fellows, Charlie Parker, who were not trying to make hit records. They were adventurous in a different way. They were exploring the meaning of life literally with the music and the art that they were creating.
And they were creating a voice for people who were unheard in the society.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So they invited this disenfranchised group of people who actually know how the world works.
Exactly.
I mean, that's one of the key things too. The people who are under the boot understand why hierarchy is a danger and a problem. The people in the middle class are being distracted by certain rewards and are conditioned not to ask certain questions. But the people who are at the very bottom, they understand what the problem is. So do the people at the very top.
Right.
So if you can bring those people into the debate and into the conversation in the mainstream, which is what the arts community allowed, look at the Beats. They were called at the time, like Kerouac was considered an honorary Negro, is what they were. It was the language. And the idea was just like, listen, I'm going to ignore the privilege I have with my white skin, and I'm going to recognize that there are victims of the structure that we're all living inside. And it's not right. Anybody with a humanitarian bone in their body would recognize that the suffering is not justified inside these codified strata that the upper echelons of society construct for us to engage with and live in. And the other element that I want to bring in that I think is something that people should recognize is that with the baby boom generation, the younger generation that was born after the Second World War, there was this moment with, I think it was the very first Mouseketeer Club, the Mouseketeers. They had a commercial that was actually geared towards children specifically. It wasn't geared towards trying to get the parents to buy something, geared to the children to then nag their parents for it. And what it was a cap gun. It was called a burp gun, right? And that changed how a younger generation dealt with grown-ups and society. Because what happened then was they could not sell enough burp guns before Christmas because they were speaking directly to children. They knew what children were curious about and interested in. Children nagged their parents. After the Second World War, if you talk to anybody from that generation, the whole idea was just like, we are so happy to be alive because, we weren't annihilated because of the weaponry and the global catastrophe that the war had provided to us. We're going to give what our children are asking, because this is going to be the new paradigm. We are going to give what our children are asking. So what happened with that generation was they grew up. They didn't want burp guns anymore. They didn't want what the advertising agencies were basically selling them. They got older, and so what were their wants as you get older? You start to look around and you say, "Oh, I want a cleaner environment." I think the feminization of society is important. Non-aggression outside of the United States is something that we're interested in. So all of a sudden you have this generation that got conditioned to have their wants satisfied by, yes, advertising, but advertising represents grown-ups, power structures, right? So you get into the 1960s, you've been conditioned to ask for what you want from people who will give it to you. They're not going to be giving that. So all of a sudden you have this radicalized moment where all of a sudden the power structures are not satisfying your demands for a cleaner environment, a safer way to engage with the world and other countries. So then you're politicized in a way, and then you demand it. And it's not about right and left. That was the other thing that was happening at that time. It was not about a Republican, Democrat elites that you were going to ask. It was much more about like, fuck mom and dad. They're not listening to us. So we've got to congregate with ourselves and reshape society in a way that is meaningful. And how do you do that? Again, you take over the what defines the culture, which is this arts community, and what is this going to look like? There's a sexual revolution that sort of elbows out all of the puritanical ideas about, the nuclear family. And you have this exploration that is revealing about so many things, and allows you to ask that question, wait a minute, what is the meaning of life in a global sense, no longer a sort of a nationalized concept of that kind of search.
Yeah, because I was thinking when you were talking about how people in the 50s, early 60s, young people or white artists started identifying also with people who were discriminated and excluded from the society. But I also think that a lot of that counterculture revolution came about because people who grew up in relative prosperity after the Second World War, the middle-class kids, felt empty inside.
Yeah.
They felt empty. They saw their parents, the suburban houses, and people felt empty. And then you had artists and poets and musicians who gave voice to that. And the other thing that you had was the draft, because then they felt empty, and then you had the draft, and so all the young guys were being drafted, and suddenly this became a political issue. And I know, Ed and I have had conversations about this, about, was I a hippie? No, I was not a hippie. I was an activist, and we felt differently, because it wasn't just about not wearing a bra and growing your hair long and group showers. It was about stopping the war. It was about putting our bodies on the line. It was an internal dynamic. We were looking to, I think, to artists and musicians as inspiration and to give voice to things. And that in turn gave a lot of courage to all of these young people who were out in the streets. I felt very conflicted about that, and still do looking back, because I thought a lot of it was also very self-centered. It was really about, I want to find the real me out there, which you see another iteration of now. Whereas I was in what felt like a real minority in that time, who were young people who were walking onto military bases or lying down in front of the Pentagon, or, burning their draft cards and going to prison. And so it sort of felt like, well, couldn't we also have those 500,000 bodies ready to do that, instead of just ready to go to a music festival? And, so it was a complicated time also in that sense.
Yeah. And it requires all of those kinds of observations, because if you think about how one is politicized to give a shit about other people, to know that the meek need our attention. So everybody's light comes on at a different time and for a different reason. So if you can get somebody who, for example, many people who, with regards to the draft, previous to their number being called up, they weren't politicized. They didn't care. So yes, then all of a sudden it was about them. And then they had to figure out, all right, have their girlfriend break their legs, so that they can delay entry, or even, make it so it wasn't going to happen. It was about them. What happened after that? Because ultimately it's not, there is a way to engage with politics by understanding the multiplicity, the group, the needs of the group. You can extend that out to the species, quite literally. But I think it's okay to start with just like, wait a minute, I am in danger. I am somebody who is vulnerable and should not be made to suffer. Then that, if you can convince yourself of that, which is a pretty easy thing to convince yourself of. And yes, there are elements of egotism inside of that, and it can be warped into a kind of arrogance if it is, hijacked by other belief systems, we'll say. At least it's there. The spark is there for extending empathy to somebody else after you have sympathy for yourself. And also watching it from a distance. I mean, if yes, there are people that their idea of being political was to go to Woodstock and to go slide around in the mud, yes, and have that kind of freedom. There's people on the outside who look at that, like me looking back at that, is just like, that is beautiful to me. I so wish that I had the opportunity to participate in that, because while we have to have many, many tools when it comes to changing the society for the better, because we all live and experience reality circumstantially, sort of in the moment that we're in. That's the key thing about art.
Okay, there we go. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's one of the key things about that I love about being an artist and engaging with other people's art, because most of the time, outside of interacting with art, and hence our private time and our leisure time, which is when we're most true to ourselves and to the people that we associate with, what we're doing is we're either reflecting on something that we just did, or we're anticipating something where we need to go. And that prevents us from existing in the moment. And unless you're existing in the moment, you're existing in an abstraction that is very, it can be manipulated by outside forces in a very easy way. Where the impetus for you is just like, you've got to do A, B, and C in order to get D, which could be just an income, respect from society, and to avoid penalties from, the corporatization of everything, because if all of our survival needs are contingent upon our ability to make money, because all of those survival needs come to us at a cost, we literally have to pay for them. Anything that jeopardizes our ability to make money is going to prevent us from seeing the bigger picture that we exist outside of economics, the hierarchy of that, right? And that's really key. So what art does, we engage with art in these places where we are trying to not think about that stuff. We're trying to feel an authenticity that we don't typically get to experience. That's why it's really precious to people and meaningful to people, and why people guard that time. And sadly, it seems to be less and less. It's relegated to when you come home from work. It's relegated to weekend time if you can carve it out, when really this is the time that it is literally the meaning of life. This is the things that should make us inspired to recognize what is going on when we're not doing that, which is we are made to be automatons that are serving somebody else's reasoning for our time. We're many of us are relegated to wage slavery in order to get to the end of the day so we can afford
to buy the things that we don't really need.
Right, exactly.
And so can you talk a little bit about risk-taking then in that context as an artist? And because to me, having heard some of your stories and sort of looking back on my own, it seems to me that the truest moments are actually the ones when you take the risk and be the artist that you want to be.
I would even say, if we're talking about art as a language and art as something that can inspire people to think and feel in a certain way, I tend to think about it as just very similar to how I speak and engage with people without doing it through art. I mean, just think about it. It's funny that it is called a risk, because really what is being communicated with the art that you and I are sort of talking about It's art that attempts to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's art that tries to label toxic bullshit that surrounds us. That to me is just the responsibility of a human being, even outside of art. People who you should be communicating that with just your words,
Mm-hmm.
right? The thing with art, the reason why it seems like something different to people, because most people don't engage with that as a form of communication. Most people aren't musicians. Most people don't engage with visual arts. While they like that stuff, and it does remind them what it means to be a human being, they're not practitioners. And it seems spectacular to many people because they read that kind of language with their whole physiology. Where if you compare that to sort of the lingual communication, which is how people communicate most of the time with words, begins with their intellect, sometimes only stays there. But our experience of life is a much more full body experience. So the audience is thrilled, the audience members of art, music, visual art, even poetry, it asks for full engagement of their whole physiologies, which is the full engagement of an organism with reality itself. So that's where I find that the authenticity of the communication is far and away more inspiring and more true to people, even if you just consider how one engages with a sunset. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon and you've seen the sunset, one way to screw that up completely is try to explain it with words. In fact, you try not to do that, because the authenticity of the experience that is transcendent for you is being in the moment and engaging with the full body experience, relying on your physiology to, quote unquote, define what you're enjoying. And it's not about relegating it to words to do that, which are just stand-ins for one's experience of life. It's the concept of reality that is encased inside words and the lingual language. So the best we can do is approximate a version of reality by ignoring our heart and going with our head when we engage only with words. But art asks for both the heart and the head to enjoy and experience what life means. Think about what the job of a joke is. Why do we all like jokes so much? I think we all like jokes so much because it basically says, here's your opportunity to think outside the box and consider something that you haven't considered before. Let's look at whatever the subject of the joke is there's a couple ways that it's being presented to you. You're going to be surprised by the alternative take, which says, all right, there's three-dimensionality around this topic. We can now go around something, cross all the lines, that were there previous to say this is going to be inappropriate, this is going to be obscene, this is going to be not the right way to engage with a subject, which is where, poking fun of religious things or different orthodoxies, even in politics. It allows you to have a radical moment of reconsideration of a subject. So you do that. It's radicalizing in that way. And so much of humor, if you just look even at the history of satire, is we react to it with laughter and bemusement because sometimes it's just blunt fact.
Mm-hmm. It kind of puts us in our place too, right?
It's actually been described sometimes. Stand-up comedy is the art of saying private thoughts in a public space. And when you're in a private space, it's very hard to sit alone in a room and embrace what we've been calling throughout this conversation bullshit. Because it's bullshit, and that's one of the key things about an artist. An artist tends to work in isolation. Just like somebody who's trying to figure out something. If you're a student and you're trying to figure out the right answer, or if you're a scientist and you're looking for something of a revealed truth, you're trying to minimize distraction and you're focused on the job at hand. Now, when you're focused on the job at hand, you're not going to be like, okay, what is the propagandized version of truth? No, you're going to be like, what is the authentic truth? And I've talked to my class about this, and the analogy that I've given them is if you're sitting alone at home in your room and you all of a sudden have an itchy ass, what do you do? And they all know what you do. You immediately itch it. There's no pause. But if you have an itchy ass in public, the impulse is not to You want to scratch it, but you have to figure out something to do because you can't all of a sudden scratch your ass in public. Now, if you consider that just as a body irritant, there are cultural irritants. There are conceptual irritants that living inside society you would love to paw at because it is an irritant. And that's one of the things about the arts community, that if you allow the arts community to define the context of the language and the conversation debate that you're going to present to the rest of the world, it's really, really important because you're drawing the parameters then of how adult the conversation can be. And inside of that is also how fun it can be, and how joyful it can
be. How it can change the conversation. It can change it, you touch people in a different way. It's a different entrance into your consciousness when you're experiencing artistic expression than listening to words.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, even just, and it doesn't even have to be that fun. I mean, I think about Bob Dylan, what Bob Dylan was doing, those were particularly his early stuff, that what quote unquote protest songs that he was writing. Those were just basically recognizing that we are all disenfranchised people who should have a heart that we are aware beats for other people.
Yes.
Right. It's not that it's fun. It's just true. And so that's what I was saying about art. So much of the time, it's about is speaking blunt honesty to people who are not used to hearing it. And it's refreshing.
And voices or not being invited, or the issue that you've also mentioned in a number of places, the commercialization of the arts. And if we're thinking about, because we're a network of artists and arts organizations who are looking for ways to impact the larger social issues of our time, the issue of the exclusion of people fleeing from war who are trying, or climate change, the issue of young people trying to stand up to the fossil fuel industry, the issue of pollution and of climate disasters, the issue of the what is it called, the unipolar world where only the US and NATO get to be the boss of everybody else in the world. How do we leverage our art, and how do we find enough satisfaction in whatever it is that we can do to keep us going?
What we do is we recognize the fact that we're not alone with these concerns that you're talking about, and that the issues are really not that complicated. Yeah. They really aren't. I mean, and that's the beauty of the work that I feel like I do, and the people that I really respect, is that keep it elemental, because it's obvious that we have to keep things elemental. Our impulses are to live another day. We are driven simply to live another day. Okay? So if we recognize that as this is an impulse of the species, then you can start to see where the fragmentation starts to happen, like I was saying earlier, where we're relegated into these different spaces and forced to engage with the debate, the political and cultural debate, according to the parameters drawn by power. Just even the whole idea of immigration is ridiculous, because then you're giving credibility to the concept of borders.
Exactly.
Which is not right. It's just not true. It's not a truism that should be a part of the debate, except to say that, pointed out, is not a truism. So all of those things are built in to distract us from the central message that we are here for a short time. We all have the same desire to quite literally protect each other and live in each other's love and safety, and that's the beginning of the conversation. So, what the arts are there to do, is to demonstrate that. Enter the arts. That's what we were saying about earlier, about reminding us that it is the meaning of life, and it should not just happen when we get home from work, and it should not be considered leisure time. It should be considered something much more, saturated with how we exist in the world all the time.
Yeah, that's very beautifully said. In our cases, we're working in places where people have endured war, And we're not going beyond
Right.
performing. We're creating ways that children and young people and sometimes women and so forth can make music as a way of discovering all of these things we've been talking about for themselves again, basically, building community connection and finding out who am I and what do I have to express, to give, giving that space.
Right.
So those
Giving that space.
two functions of art that...
And saying I'm not alone.
Yes.
And right. I mean, that's one of the key things.
Yes.
I mean, because I'm sure that the artists that you have dealt with, that's one of the great joys, is that you build this community based on that feeling and the discovery that, oh my gosh, I am not alone. I am worried about all of these things that this person is saying, and they're saying it with their art in a way that is really, really inspiring. Because as we were saying earlier, sometimes it's just the blunt truth, and it's inviting other people to congregate inside the same feeling of just like, let's have a meaningful life. I mean, quite literally, that's really what it's about. Let's have a meaningful life that is not being controlled by somebody else's values and passions that minimize ours. I mean, that's the thing. That's the great thing, that people, when they get into this kind of work, there is a great reward in engaging in this way. And the great reward is there's other people that think and feel like I do. And you know what? This feels true. I've been existing in a theater that didn't ask for what my opinion was. Mm-hmm. And now I know what it feels like to talk about what my opinion is, and to speak to speak truth to power. We hear that all the time. It's speaking truth to these concoctions of nonsense and control that we should be aware of, because life is something that we should celebrate.
And is that where you get your hope?
Absolutely. I mean, every single day is a new day for me. I'm thrilled to be waking up every single morning. And so, yes, I see it as a daily exercise. I don't see it in any larger way. I would lose steam and I would become exhausted if I started to expand my understanding of what my mission is.
I think that's a lovely note to end our conversation. Could you tell where people can find you? And do you have any projects coming up? Anything special that we can point people to?
Yes, absolutely. My own site, which is clowncrack.com, which was hacked recently, but it should be up by the end of the day of the day. You can find me always on sheerpost.com. You can see me. I've illustrated Chris Hedges' columns that he's been writing for the last many years. So he and I partner every week. He's on Substack, and it's the Chris Hedges Report, I believe. And I've just continued to, I'm working on my first graphic novel. I'm working on 2 right now. I'll see which one I finish first. I'm going to be writing a book about the history of the alternative press called What's the Alternative? Yes, and Nobody Left, in fact, that we were talking about earlier, the second printing is actually, I'm waiting to hear any day now, is going to be available inside the next couple weeks. So it has some bonus material in it. So rush right out. Well,
as somebody who actually did leave, at least left there, but is still on the left, I guess you could say, and trying to live in the ways that you so beautifully described, I just want to thank you very much for this conversation. It's been very inspiring, and people, please look him up. Mr. Fish, brilliant, provocative, funny, and inspiring.
Thanks a lot, Laura. It was a great time.
Thank you.
ReSounding is brought to you by the Art27 Network, a network of like-minded initiatives using art and culture to respond to the ongoing crisis of displacement of human beings in Europe and around the world. To find out more and to join our growing network, you can visit our website, art27.art, or follow us on Facebook at art27. This podcast was produced and edited by Ed Holland. The theme tune was written by Matteo Gillespie in collaboration with Synca. Thank you for listening.